Okay, so following the unparalleled success of my first video tutorial, I have been requested and urged and encouraged to do a second video. And this time I'm going to be talking about the exam technique required for the second exam in the 2017 GCSE History examinations window, and this exam is going to be on Germany from 1918 to 1939, which is covering the period of time immediately after World War I, including the rise to power of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, and then the first 6 years of Hitler's control of Germany, and looking specifically at how the Nazi regime impacted on the lives of ordinary German people. Again, on the left-hand side of the screen, you will see an example past paper. This is last year's paper, and then on the right of the screen at the moment we have a picture of Adolf Hitler in some lederhosen. But in the next few moments, this PowerPoint is going to explain the technique required to get the highest marks for each of the 6 questions that are within this paper. Exactly the same as the Cold War paper and also the sources paper, which will be the last exam. Most students will have 1 hour and 15 minutes to write their answers, but obviously students with extra time will have longer. This exam paper has 6 questions that need to be answered. Question 1 contains 4 sub-questions, so there's 1A, 1B, 1C and 1D. Question 2, there is a choice between 2A or 2B, and the same with question 3, there is a choice of 3A or 3B. Again, the instructions on the front page are very similar to the Cold War paper in that it explains clearly that the marks available for each question are shown in brackets, and that the marks available should be used as a guide on how much time to spend on each question. Roughly speaking, you should be looking to spend about 1.5 minutes per mark available. And there is one question in this paper, question 3, that has an asterisk next to it, and that means that there are additional marks available for spelling, punctuation and grammar, and that extra care should be taken with question 3 because you can gain an extra 4 marks if your spelling, punctuation and grammar is accurate, and that could be the difference between one grade and the next. Okay, let's have a look then at question 1A. Question 1A is worth 4 marks. So for that question, 4 marks, slight typo there on my PowerPoint. It's not worth 6 marks, it's worth 4 marks. And that means that because it's worth 4 marks, you should be spending an absolute maximum time of 6 minutes writing your answer. For this question, you will have a historical source. It will be a written source, and then the question itself is underneath the source. It will say, what can you learn from source A about? Now, if we have a look at the example from last year, it's saying, what can you learn from source A about Nazi employment policies? Obviously, this year, the focus of the question and the source itself will be completely different. Now, what this question is asking you to do, if you have a look at the PowerPoint on the right, it's asking you to make an inference. And then once you've made that inference, support that inference with evidence from the source itself. Now, an inference is where you look at the information and you basically go one step further and you say to yourself, from this information, what can I learn? What can I tell about Nazi employment policies in this case? All right, and we're all experts at making inferences. If you were to walk into a room and you saw somebody crying, straight away in your mind you would be making inferences about why they're crying. Maybe they've just received some bad news. Maybe they've just been fired from their job. Maybe their wife or their husband has just left them. straight away you would make inferences. And that's exactly what you have to do with this. You have to look at this information here in source A, and you have to say, what can I learn from this about Nazi employment policies? So let's have a look at the source itself. It says, when Hitler came to power, there were millions out of work. The Nazis employed people to make weapons and recruited men into the army. Jobs were created by building houses, schools and autobahns. If you remember, autobahns were the motorways that the Nazi Party built. Unemployment dropped to less than 1 million by 1938. However, the working week rose from 45 hours in 1928 to 50 hours in 1939. So, one inference that you could make straight away about Nazi employment policies is that their employment policies were looking to improve Germany. That would be an inference, okay? And to strengthen Germany. Nowhere in source A does it say that Nazi employment policies were about strengthening Germany or improving the country. But that's an inference, because I've looked at that information. I've looked about the fact that the Nazis were employing people to make weapons and getting men into the army and building houses and schools and autobahns. And I'm thinking to myself, well, those are all things that would strengthen Germany or improve Germany. So that's an inference. So if I was answering this question, I would use the following sentence starters. I'd say, from the source, I can learn that Nazi employment policies were focused on improving Germany or strengthening the country. That's an inference, full stop. And I'd then say, I can tell this because the source states, and then I would quote the information that's led me to that inference. So I'd be quoting, the Nazis employed people to make weapons and recruited men into the army. Jobs were created by building houses, schools and autobahns. Okay, so that's my inference. Now, one supported inference is enough for full marks. But if I was you, I would always try and make 2 inferences to be on the safe side. Okay, so a second inference was that Nazi employment policies weren't all positive. They had some negative effects on people. Who would be happy about going from, on average, working 45 hours a week to 50 hours? That's an extra 5 hours on your working week. That's a really negative thing, isn't it? So you will always be provided with a source that allows you to make at least 2 inferences. And personally, I would always try and make 2 inferences to make sure you get the marks. So you'd write, from the source I can learn, and then your inference. I can tell this because the source states, and then you'd give your quote, making sure you use quotation marks. And then you say, a second thing I can learn from the source is, whatever your second inference is, I can tell this because the source states, and then a second quote. Okay? One thing to make sure you don't do is just repeat what's written in the source. If I put, one thing I can learn from source A about Nazi employment policies is that they employed people to make weapons and recruited men into the army, I'm only actually going to get 1 out of 4, because all I'm doing is repeating what's already written, and that's not a high-level skill. Anybody could do that. And the other thing to remember as well, don't waste your time analysing nature, origin and purpose. That's not required. Make your inferences and then move on. Okay. The next question, okay, is one that you should feel very comfortable with regarding the format of the question and the technique required to answer it. Okay, it's worth 6 marks. This is question 1B. It's worth 6 marks, and therefore you should spend about 8 minutes on your answer. And again, the start of this question will be along these lines. Describe the key features of, and in this example, it's Nazi censorship. So when the Nazis were controlling the information that people had access to once they came to power. All right. It could be describe the key features of the Munich Putsch. Describe the key features of the Treaty of Versailles. All right. Now, this is, and the way that you approach this is identical to the describe the key features of style question in the Cold War paper. And all you need to do is you need to give very simple statements that are followed by supporting detail. So you want to use these types of sentence starters. One key feature of Nazi censorship was, and then there's all kinds of things that you could talk about here. You could talk about books being burnt that the Nazis didn't want people to have access to. You could talk about the fact that newspaper reporters had to attend briefings where they were told what news they could and couldn't report on. Newspaper reporters had to submit their stories, and if the Nazi Party weren't happy with the stories, they would be censored. You could talk about the fact that certain newspapers were banned. There's all kinds of things that you can talk about regarding how the Nazis controlled information that people had. And I would expect, if you had a question on censorship and propaganda, that you're mentioning Joseph Goebbels, who was the leading Nazi put in charge of it, and you're also mentioning his organisation that was set up, the Ministry for People's Enlightenment and Propaganda, and how they controlled the information that people were getting. So you want to use sentence starters like this to really signpost the information that you're going to give the examiner. One key feature of Nazi censorship was, another key feature was, and then a final key feature was. And what you want to do is you want to give a simple statement followed by supporting detail. So it could be, one key feature of Nazi censorship was that they created an organisation to control and monitor information that the German people received. Full stop. That's a simple statement. The Ministry for People's Enlightenment and Propaganda was set up and run by leading Nazi Joseph Goebbels. That is a supporting statement with accurate details. That's showing your revision. That's what's going to get you the marks. Now, as I said in my advice for the Cold War paper, you can get 6 out of 6 for this question by writing 2 well-supported key features. But personally, I would always recommend writing 3 short paragraphs detailing 3 features, because that's what's going to gain you, or guarantee you at least, full marks. And do not be put off by the amount of space you're given to write your answer. You've got more or less 2 whole sides of A4, but I've seen people write enough to get full marks on 2/3 to a side of A4. I don't think you need this second piece of paper. Okay. Right. The next question is question 1C. And this question will always ask you about the effects of an event, the effects of an event. And we've actually got 2 examples on the screen now. We've got the one on the left that says explain the effects of the Enabling Act in Germany in 1933. And then this one on the right-hand side, it says explain the effects of the Dawes Plan, 1924, on Germany. Now, a lot of students fall into a trap here because they see the second half of this question, so in this example, the Enabling Act, or in this example, the Dawes Plan, and the first thing that they start doing is they just start describing in huge amounts of detail the Enabling Act or the Dawes Plan. That's not what the question is asking you to do. It's saying, here's the event, okay, so here's the Enabling Act, or here's the Dawes Plan. What were the effects of that event? What happened next? All right, and you've got to explain those things. So that word because is really going to help you here. This question is worth 8 marks, so I would be looking for you to spend about 12 minutes on your answer to this question. So it's all about the consequences of an event, and more importantly, explaining the consequences of an event. You need to write about 2 effects in this answer, and you should aim to write, I would recommend, 3 paragraphs. 2 for the 2 effects that you're going to write about, and if you can, but it's not essential, but it will help, try and write a 3rd paragraph where you give a little conclusion. Okay? And you need to use sentence starters like this. One effect of the Enabling Act was, and then whatever your first one that you're going to give. The most obvious thing that I would mention about the effect of the Enabling Act would be the banning, first of all, of the trade unions, then all other political parties, And then if you need a third one, you could talk about the banning of local parliaments or Länder. Okay, so one effect of the Enabling Act was that Hitler immediately used his new powers to ban trade unions. Okay, but then what you need to do is you need to explain why Hitler did that. Okay, so with the banning of the trade unions, he did it to remove a big potential source of opposition, because lots of working class people belonged to trade unions and also very often were communists as well. And the effect of that, the fact that it's weakening his biggest rivals. When you move on to do your second paragraph, you'd say, as a result of banning trade unions, another effect of the Enabling Act was, and then the most obvious thing to write about next would be the banning of all other political parties other than the Nazi Party. Now, this is really important because saying as a result of, mentioning your first effect and then saying another effect was, because what's that starting to do is to show that you are linking the two together. Okay, because history is not a load of separate events, they are interlinking events. One thing leads to the next event, leads to the next event. And then finally, if you do have the time to do a conclusion, overall the effects of the Enabling Act were, and then you do a conclusion where you explain those effects and try and explain the links between them. And answers that will get the full 8 marks are ones that link the events to the consequences together. So try and think about using the following connective sentence starters and so on. So furthermore, in addition, this meant that, as a result of. And they're all phrases that you can use that will help you to make those links. Okay, now that's question 1C. Question 1D is also worth 8 marks, but this time it's kind of the opposite way round. Question 1C was taking an event and then asking you to talk about the consequences of that event. Question 1D is actually, again, taking an event, but it's actually asking you to explain what led to that thing happening. Okay, so the causes rather than the consequences of the event. So on the left-hand side, here's the example. Explain why support for the Nazi Party increased in the years 1929 to 32. We've got another example here. Explain why the German economy faced problems in the years 1919 to 1923. Again, what you sometimes get students doing is they just describe these events. Okay, they see that. Another example could be explain why Hitler and the Nazi Party launched the Munich Putsch in 1923. I've seen that question before, and I've seen students fall into the trap of just starting to describe what happened in the Munich Putsch. That's not what it's asking. It's asking you, why did the Nazis launch the Putsch? Okay, so here's the event, and this question is asking you to say what led to the event happening. So what led, or what were the reasons why Nazi support increased between 1929 and 1932? Obvious thing to write about there would be the Wall Street crash and the subsequent depression. But you could also write about how the Nazis used the SA, the brown shirts. You could talk about. You could also talk about how von Papen underestimated Hitler and persuaded Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as vice chancellor. You could possibly talk about that. Those are all things that could be mentioned. Okay. This one here, explain why the German economy faced problems in the years 1919 to 1923. There are just 2 massively obvious things to write about here. Number 1 would be the Treaty of Versailles and the reparations that Germany were forced to pay. And the second thing I would write about would be hyperinflation, the German government responding to the Treaty of Versailles. So there's a nice link by printing more money because the German economy was bankrupt. Okay, so this question again is worth This question again is worth 8 marks. So again, it's about 12 minutes long that you should be spending unless you get extra time. And as I've said here, this is about explaining the causes of an event. And you're going to get full marks if you can explain 2 causes of the event. So 2 reasons why the Nazi Party increased its popularity between 29 to 32. I mean, actually, just thinking about this, other obvious things that you could talk about here is the Nazis' use of propaganda and how they appealed to lots of different groups using the latest technology of the time. And the other thing that I would talk about actually would be about how Hitler reorganised the party during a spell when they weren't particularly popular. And I would again explain how the changes that he made to the party kind of came to fruition once Germany was in trouble. Okay, so you need to write 2 explained causes of why the Nazi Party increased its popularity. And you're going to get the highest marks if you can explain links between the various things that you speak about and also prioritise them. So you need to perhaps be saying things like, the most important cause of the Nazi Party increasing its popularity after 1929 was the Wall Street crash. And then you give some detail about the Wall Street crash, what happened, America recalling its loans, plunging the German economy into crisis again. And then you explain why the Wall Street crash helped the Nazi Party increase its popularity. And similar to the question 1C, if you can give a conclusion, that's a really useful way of summarising up your main points and explaining those links or prioritising the causes, saying this was the most important. Okay, and then some sentence starters. Perhaps the most important cause of the Nazi Party increasing its popularity was the Wall Street crash. Okay, perhaps the most important cause of support for the Nazi Party increasing was their use of propaganda, whatever you personally believe it is. This was a cause of the Nazi Party increasing support because, and that word because will force you to explain your point. This led to another cause of support for the Nazi Party increasing. So that is going to start to make you explain links between events. Critical thing to remember when you're doing all of this is that at any opportunity you add relevant and precise supporting detail to show off your knowledge and the revision that you've done prior to the exam. Okay, so we're now up to question 2, and just like question 1C and 1D, question 2 is also worth 8 marks. So again, you're going to spend 12 minutes writing your answer. You have a choice this time, so you do either 2A or 2B. You need to read both of them carefully, and you need to make the choice as to which one you feel most confident answering. Okay, this is with any of the questions. Be very, very aware of dates. Okay, so if you look at 2A, it very clearly says 1935 to 38. So for that question, you'd need to think very carefully about the events that you wrote about. You'd be starting with the Nuremberg laws with 1935. So just be very, very aware of that. Again, look at these years here, 1923 to 1928. So that is 1923 would be the Munich Putsch up till 1928, just before the Wall Street crash. And that is the same with any other question. If there are any dates, take your highlighter in that exam, highlight the dates in the question, and make sure you're thinking carefully about what happened in that period of time. Okay, you will notice both questions have the command word about explaining, all right? But also this question, both 2A and 2B will have the word changed in it. So question 2 is all about explaining change. And if you explain change, you need to give a description about what was happening before the changes took place. So I've given the example before, explain how your life has changed in year 11 compared to year 7. Yeah, you would need to, if you were answering that, you would describe your existence as a year 11 with all of the revision and homework and applying for college or sixth form or whatever else you're doing, and then you would describe as well those carefree days 5 years ago now when you were in year 7. Okay, so for this question, you know, if you were doing 2B and you were explaining the changes that the Nazi Party brought in between 1923 and 1928, you'd need to explain what was going on prior to that point. And the same if you were doing 2A and you were talking about how Jews were being treated differently in Germany after 1935, you'd need to explain what had been going on prior to that point. All right. So, as I've said here on this bullet point, these questions are asking you to explain something, how something changed, or a process, so the way in which something happened. You're going to need to write about 2 changes or events. So you're going to be expected to write about 2 changes that German Jews experienced. You're going to need to explain 2 changes to the Nazi Party between 23 and 28. Try and, again, very similar to question 1C and 1D, try and make links between the events. And again, if you can do a 3rd paragraph where you give a conclusion, that is a really good way of making sure you have explained how events are linked. You can also prioritize things. So again, you could say the most important change to the Nazi Party in the years 23 to 28 was, or the most important change experienced by Jews in Germany between 35 and 38 was the Nuremberg laws. All right, but it's not enough just to say it was the most important change, or it was linked. These two changes are linked. You must explain how they are linked, or why one is more important than the other. Okay. And here's some sentence starters. Again, one of the most important changes, that's getting you to prioritise. This led to, this will help you to start showing how things are linked. One of the worst changes was previously, and that's going to help you to explain change, because you're going to be explaining how change has occurred. All right, now the final question is question 3. And again, like question 2, you have a choice of either 3A or 3B. So again, what you would need to do is you would need to read both questions carefully and make a decision about which one you feel more confident on. This question is worth 16 marks, but there are also 4 additional marks available for spelling, punctuation and grammar. So in essence, it's worth 20 marks. And because it's worth so much, you should be looking to spend about 25 minutes on your answer. All right, it's really important that you are disciplined with time. So you will have a hypothesis, all right, for each question, and it will ask you your opinion. So have a look at 3A first of all. Was introducing the Rentenmark the most important reason for German recovery in the years 23 to 29? If you remember, the Rentenmark was the new currency that Gustav Stresemann introduced in 1923 to replace the worthless German currency that had become worthless through hyperinflation. And it then says you may use the following in your answer. The first bullet point says introducing the Rentenmark, which, if you remember, was mentioned in the hypothesis. And then the second bullet point gives a second factor that led to German recovery in the years 23 to 29. So we've got joining the League of Nations in 1926. And it then says you must also include information of your own. So if you were going to go for question 3A, you'd need to start thinking about, well, what were some of the other reasons why Germany recovered in that period of time? You could talk about the Dawes Plan. You could talk about the Young Plan, which were both reasons for German economic recovery, very closely linked with reparations. You could talk about the Kellogg-Briand Pact, You could talk about the Locarno Pact, which were both agreements that helped Germany recover its international reputation. So there's plenty of things that you could talk about there. Personally, if it was me, though, I would go for question. If this was my paper, and don't forget your paper will be different, I would go for question 3B, because this is just one of the nicest questions ever. So, were military clauses the main reason why Germans were opposed to the Treaty of Versailles? I mean, what a doddle of a question. And you've got here, you may use the following in your answer. Military clauses, which has just been mentioned in the hypothesis. That's your first reason. Reparations. And then you've got to think of other things that the Germans opposed about the Treaty of Versailles. Well, crikey, you could talk about land being taken off of Germany. You could talk about the war guilt clause. You could talk about the fact that the Treaty of Versailles was seen by, well, not seen, it was a dictated peace. It was known as a diktat. The Germans had no say in the terms of the treaty. So, that is a really, really nice question. But to be honest with you, 3A is a question that would be easy to write about, but I just think 3B would be easier. Okay, so for your answer, you need to write here, it should say 4 paragraphs, all right? 1 on each of the bullet points provided. So you'd write a bullet point on military clauses and a bullet point on reparations. Then you do a 3rd paragraph on a reason of your own, and then you do a 4th paragraph where you would do a conclusion, okay? So your first paragraph, you'd say an important reason, and we'll just look at 3B here for an example. An important reason why the Germans opposed the Treaty of Versailles was because of the military clauses. Then what you do is you'd actually describe the military clauses using really precise supporting detail. So you talk about the German army was reduced to 100,000 men. They were allowed no air force or submarines. Their navy was reduced, and if you can, give precise numbers of what the navy was reduced to. And then what you would do is you would explain why the military clauses were opposed by the German people. So you'd say the German people hated this aspect of the Treaty of Versailles because it made Germany weak and vulnerable. All right, and you'd probably go into a bit more detail. It left Germany vulnerable to attack from other nations. Then you go on to talk about reparations. You say another thing that the Germans hated about the Treaty of Versailles were the reparations. It was Britain and France who wanted reparations the most because of the damage both countries had suffered during the First World War, especially France. The figure that reparations were finally set at was £6.6 billion. Okay. The German people hated this because at the end of World War I, the German economy was bankrupt and Germany needed that money to rebuild their country. Also, Germany was not solely to blame for all of the damage caused in the First World War. Therefore, it was unfair. Then you give a 3rd reason of your own. So you say, another reason the Germans opposed the Treaty of Versailles was because of the war guilt clause. Under Article 231, Germany had to accept full responsibility for starting the First World War. The German people did not feel that this was fair because although Germany played a major role in the start of the First World War, other countries played just an important role in the build-up of tension. Okay, so for each of the things, you describe it, you use precise supporting detail, and then most importantly, you explain how the bullet point or your own ideas contributed towards the outcome that's mentioned in the hypothesis. Okay, and then you do a conclusion. You'd say, in conclusion, actually, in reality, it is too simplistic to say that military clauses were the main reason why the Germans hated the Treaty of Versailles. Or you'd say, actually, all 3 reasons that I've spoken about were important, but just to different levels. But it's not enough just to say that and then think that that's going to get you the marks. You actually need to explain how each was important and how each contributed in its different ways. Okay? So the best answers are the ones that show links between the different events or prioritise them. Okay, that you could say that one was the most important, and then this was the second most important, and so on. But actually, I think, I think most historians would agree that it is too simplistic to say that one is the most important. They are all important, but just to varying levels. Okay, and remember about the spelling, punctuation and grammar, 4 additional marks available. That really could be the difference between one grade and the next. And just remember that you must write about the 2 factors provided and at least one of your own in this answer. With the time you've got, you'll probably only have enough time to write about the 3rd factor. Okay. If I was you in the exam, I'd actually use this little rectangle as a planning area. So I'd put a number 1 there, a number 2 there. I'd write a number 3 here and write whatever I'm going to write about here. And then I'd put a number 4 and put conclusion. Okay. Just and again, I've given you an example here. I did this with the Cold War paper as well. Was support of parents the most important reason for success in your exams? Explain your answer. So you'd say a very important reason for my success in my GCSEs was the support of my parents. Then you would describe some of the things that your parents did to be supportive, and you would then explain how that support has helped you to be successful. Then you do a second paragraph. You say another reason why I've been successful is because of the hours that I've put in outside of school. You describe what you've been doing, where you've been working at the dinner table or up in your bedroom every night revising. Okay, and you describe how many hours you've done of revision, and then you'd explain how that has helped you to be successful in your exams. And then you'd say a third very important reason why I've been successful is because of the help that my teachers have provided me. And then you'd describe the sort of help that you've received, and then you'd explain how that's led to you being successful. And then you'd say, in conclusion, it's a bit too simplistic to say that it's just the support of my parents that was the most important reason. Actually, the 3 reasons I've spoken about have all been important because, and then you'd explain the interrelationship of them, and how they've all been important to varying levels. Just some final reminders. Very similar, some of these reminders to the Cold War paper, but useful to remember nevertheless. Again, use the question to frame sentence starters. This will help you to make sure you're focused on answering the question. Okay, so the most important cause of Germany feeling that the Treaty of Versailles was too harsh was. This was a cause because. So using the question to start your answer off, to start each paragraph off, is a really simple practice to do, but it will help you to stay focused on answering the question. Again, like the Cold War paper, use any opportunity to add supporting detail. You will have done tons of revision when you get to June the 14th and you're doing your Germany paper. It is your chance to show off how hard you've worked and the depth of your knowledge. Do not, under any circumstance, leave a question blank. Even if you can only write 1 sentence, that sentence might get you 1 mark, and that mark could be the difference between one grade and the next. Manage your time very, very carefully. Very, very carefully. Make sure that you give yourself plenty of time to answer question 3. You need an absolute minimum of 25 minutes. I would actually recommend that if you're looking at the clock and you've only got 25 minutes left and you're halfway through question 2, I would stop question 2 and move on to question 3 because it's just so important. There's so many marks available. Think about those extra marks that are available for good spelling, punctuation and grammar for question 3. 4 marks available there. Take advantage of it. It could be the difference between a grade. This is optional advice. You could think about doing a brief bullet point plan to organise your thoughts. But if you do that, do not take too long creating these plans and it is purely optional. I would only really recommend it if you're really struggling to write an answer. As I mentioned earlier, be very, very aware of dates that are in questions. Do not write about events that aren't linked with the dates that are given to you. And take that highlighter in and underline keywords, key dates, command words, things like that, to make sure that you're focused on answering the question. And as with any exam, I wish you the best of luck. You can do this. You are all absolutely experts in Germany. Your subject knowledge is great. Those of you who have been completing the exam questions that I've been setting for homework, I've been very impressed with your technique, and this is your opportunity now to go out there and get the grade that you're capable of. So good luck. If you have any questions, and I also mean about revision as well, if you are revising something and you don't understand the Enabling Act, or you don't understand the effects of the Munich Putsch or something like that, please drop me an email. Please have a look at all of the resources that are on Show My Homework, and just most importantly, make sure you're revising, especially the super facts, because those super facts will give you the level of knowledge you need to be really successful in the Cold War exam and the Germany exam. And I will do a third video about how to answer the 5 questions in the final exam, the sources paper, and I'll put that up as soon as possible. Okay, if you have any questions, please email me. Keep working hard and revising hard.